It's 4 o'clock, so I guess we'll get started and call this meeting to order, the Salina City Planning Commission. So as usual, begin with our consent agenda, which is approval of our minutes from the November 15th meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I move that we approve the minutes of the November 1st regular meeting.
Second that.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of our November 1st, 15th meeting. Any discussion? All those in favor, aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll move on to public hearing items. First item tonight is number 3.1, which is application Z16-6, filed by the Salina City Planning Commission, requesting an amendment of Article 10, signs in Chapter 42 by adding Section 42.500 to set out the purpose of sign regulations, and to amend Section 42-508, which pertains to the placement and display of temporary signs. This item is continued from our November 15th meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are on items 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3 are all public hearing items, and the city's legal staff has been tremendously focused on the legal requirements pertaining to the Star Bond and TIF and downtown projects, and their concern is they don't want to be in a situation where the Planning Commission recommends versions of text amendments as prepared by staff, and then to have them make changes to that you are not aware of or they haven't presented to you. So our recommendation is that on item 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, that there be a motion to continue those items to your December 20th meeting, and we will endeavor our best to get that legal review completed, but we don't have anything substantive to prepare or present on those items until we get the full attention and feedback from our legal staff. So that would be our recommendation on item 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3 to continue those items to your December 20th meeting.
Thank you.
And seeing no one in the public to comment, I would so move.
Second.
Again, it's been moved and seconded to continue items number 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3 until the December 20th meeting. Any discussion on that? If not, all those in favor, vote aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Items are continued to November 20th, or December 20th, sorry. Bringing us to item 3.2. Application Z, no, we've done that, haven't we?
Yep, we've done that.
They're all
Administrative items next.
Well, that was quick.
It brings us to other matters. We wanted to share with you that we have a little variety for you, and instead of looking at 3.1, 2, and 3 again solely, we have an application for a site plan approval for Foley Equipment Company that wants to build a new facility just south of Kenworth on North Ohio, across from Flying J. In 2006, the Planning Commission adopted what is known as the North Ohio Gateway Overlay District to provide some additional Planning Commission oversight of development along the North Ohio corridor. This is the first project that we've had that is coming in under that overlay district. So in order for them to get a building permit for their project, their plans first have to be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission. And that is scheduled for your December 20th meeting. And so that will be an item that is added. We also wanted to call attention to the FYI items in your packet. One is an update on our floodplain remapping process. The main update at this point is that up until this point, we have been in the map preparation phase, but the state of Kansas and FEMA consider the map preparation phase to be over and the map adoption phase to be in, but we will still actually have a 90-day public comment and appeal process, and we will let you know when that clock begins, but they cannot start that 90-day public process until there is a publication in the Federal Register, and they don't know exactly when that will be. They think it may occur in late January and February. And then there is a process from that point, but the new maps are accessible on the city's website, and for once, we think that the proposed new maps are improved level of quality and accuracy from what we've had dating from 1986. So that's not to say everyone's going to be happy with the results of what they show, but we do think there's more science behind these maps than has been in the past. So
Excellent.
in that snippet is just a sample of what those, and the difference is today, if you're a real estate firm and you want to see the official flood map, we have maps that we hand out to all the real estate firms, and we have a map mounted on our wall. These will all be digital maps so that you can customize, make your own maps. A real estate firm could produce their own flood map for a client or things of that nature. So when they are finalized, they will be much more accessible and much more user-friendly and more accurate than they have been in the past. The other article in there was about the land bank in Junction City, and there has been some discussion about forming a land bank in Salina to assemble or accumulate vacant lots or tax foreclosed lots, things of that nature. But we, I think it was a report I did for the Planning Commission back about 5 years ago, and we periodically give you an update on our inventory of vacant residential lots. And I think we indicated that Salina had about 200 vacant residential lots that had services, water, sewer, and streets, and were buildable. At that same time, Junction City had 5,100 lots with water, sewer, and streets. Needless to say, they had a lot of problems with special assessments not being paid, with taxes not being paid, with lots being foreclosed on. So their land bank became the means by which they assembled those parcels. And so there again has been some discussion about forming a land bank in Salina, but that would be interesting reading for you about how land banks operate. And then, John, if you could put that slide up on the preliminary plats that's in there. At our last meeting, we had some discussion about Planning Commission policies and repeal and replacement of those by code language. And just I wanted to review for the Planning Commission, this is the final criteria as adopted by the governing body and as reviewed by the city's legal counsel. It basically says the Planning Commission shall approve or conditionally approve a plat if it finds that all of the firing criteria have been satisfied. So what we indicated to you is that if a residential preliminary plat comes forward to the Planning Commission, that our report is going to address each and every one of these items, and that the first one is that we will not bring a plat application to you if they have not met the basic submittal requirements. So, for example, every subdivision is supposed to be accompanied by a drainage study that's been prepared by a licensed engineer. If an applicant says, I want to take my plat to the Planning Commission, I'll worry about the drainage study later, then we're not going to bring the plat to you. So all the application requirements have to have been met. We're going to review it to see that it conforms with the following codes and ordinances, which would be first and foremost the zoning district regulations, but then we'll also have review of any other city codes such as fire codes or fire protections or utility requirements. That the proposed subdivision is located inside or butts the city limits. So it's basically saying that we're not interested in plats for leapfrog development if it's going to be in the city limits, and that it's adjacent to existing development supported by public infrastructure. So again, supporting the concept of no leapfrog development. And then we're going to analyze streets, city water service, sanitary sewer service, the emergency warning siren system. We're going to analyze the ability to provide police, fire protection, parks, and schools. And then much of our discussion on a separate provision was that the proposed subdivision abuts a perimeter street that either meets or will be upgraded to a city improvement standard. 7 deals with looking at this in relation to the comprehensive plan or major street plan, any corridor studies or corridor overlays or special sub-area plans that we have. And I think these 2 items were important to the Planning Commission as we look at the layout, that it integrates with both the existing and proposed street pattern and provides connectivity with adjacent subdivisions and schools, and supports walking, bicycling, and transit use. So you're basically putting the applicants on notice that you're going to be looking at all modes of transportation, including walking, cycling, and city-go bus service. That it provides dedicated connections between the subdivisions and all components of the public park system within the vicinity. In other words, we don't want a subdivision that is adjacent to a future public park and then not plan connections for that. And if it abuts an arterial street, we're going to look at the spacing and design of intersections, make sure that adequate right-of-way is provided, that the subdivision makes adequate provision for stormwater runoff control, and if there is a subdivision that has common areas, that there is a homeowners association or some adequate provision for maintenance of those common areas. And then the final statement is an application that does not satisfy all the criteria shall be denied. In the case of a denial, the Planning Commission shall identify for the applicant in writing the criteria deemed unsatisfied. So if you see a plat that comes before you and you don't think it meets those criteria and you want to vote to deny it, you can, but you have to identify for the applicant those things that you find about it that don't meet those criteria, and then we can inform the applicant in writing what those are, and they can go back to the drawing board and try to correct those things. But if they're not articulated and communicated in writing, then your decision to deny is less defensible.
A question, Dean. We often have the most trouble with the discrepancy between zoning and comprehensive plan. You've mentioned both, but how will that be considered an issue that we can deny or accept on?
Well, in many cases, especially on a fringe development, you have a request for annexation. If you look, say, at the Ryan Addition at the corner of Schilling and Ohio, we had a request for annexation. We had a request to change the zoning from agricultural to residential, and then we have the plat. The land use question about whether the highest and best use of that property is residential development should be addressed at the annexation and zoning questions, not necessarily with the plat. So usually in the sequence that comes to the Planning Commission, question one is this property that the city is capable of serving efficiently? Should it be annexed? If you say no, then you don't even need to address the other two items. If you say it should be annexed, residential zoning's appropriate, then the third part of your review is to look at the actual physical layout and connectivity on that plat and whether it meets those criteria. What we're going to do is we're going to tell you that they've requested R1 zoning, and we've reviewed all the lots, and they all have frontage, and they're all legally buildable lots, that there's nothing that's undevelopable. But the question as to whether it should be developed residentially is the zoning question. Should it be rezoned from agricultural to residential? And if you say no, then there's no reason to even act on the plat. Because the plat is based on the assumption that it's going to be developed under residential zoning. So if it comes to you and you say this property shouldn't be annexed, then you would never discuss zoning or the plat. If you say it should be annexed, it's appropriate to zone it single-family residential, but we don't think that this plat layout addresses all of the criteria in this section, then you would say we think the plat should be denied for not meeting the criteria. You shouldn't use the plat as a means to prevent it from having residential zoning.
Right. That makes sense. But when it isn't a matter of annexation, it's a project within the existing city, then where there are inconsistencies between zoning and comprehensive plan, is there still some way to approach that with
Well, in that case,
some order?
if we identify with the applicant that there's a conflict between the comprehensive, let's say it's shows as a conservation area on the comprehensive plan, which means it's flood prone or shouldn't
Right.
be developed, and a developer wants to do a residential subdivision, then the first item on your agenda would be to consider whether it should be changed from conservation area to residential, low density residential. And if you said no, it shouldn't, the comp plan should not be changed, then that would pretty much,
So that would all be in advance of their developing any
we
plat
would-
plan?
yeah, the only time that you would have a plat where you wouldn't be looking at those other aspects is last year we had a replat of a portion of River Trail, which had been annexed, zoned, and platted in
Yeah.
1998, and they were just tweaking the configuration.
Right.
Well, all you're looking at there is the plat and whether it conforms with our requirements. The same if somebody is doing a replat of a final platted area. But if you're talking about raw, undeveloped ground, and it doesn't line up with the comprehensive plan, then the first thing you're going to look at is a comprehensive plan. So we had Mr. Bradley, who had his property out there at Centennial and Farley. And we met with him and we said, this doesn't show as future residential. So rather than bringing you a plat and a zoning and all those things, we brought you the question of the comprehensive plan. And basically what we told him is that since the city didn't have any support for changing the comprehensive plan, that any plat he had was dead on arrival, and so he has now looked at other properties that aren't in conflict with the comprehensive plan.
Okay. Thank you.
So anytime there was a conflict, we would give that to you as a separate
Right,
matter.
that's good. I like that.
I think it's been much improved upon.
Yes, I think so too.
Considering some of the incidents last year and
Right.
questions we had and
Yeah.
repetition of requests.
So
and
kind of the purpose of this is that, one, we're going to write our reports, and basically we're going to prepare this as a checklist handout to developers and say, you don't have to come to the meeting and wonder what the
Right.
Planning Commission is looking for because it's on this list.
And this is precisely what I heard some of the developers say they would like to
Yes,
have.
they
Yeah.
would like that. They don't
Yeah.
want to come to the meeting and hear something that they didn't
Right.
anticipate would be brought up.
Yep.
So,
Perfect.
Yeah, and I can recall several situations where drainage was one issue that, as you mentioned, came to the fore, but they'd be here and there was no plan yet for drainage, and okay, we'd come back and look at it again, and maybe next meeting the drainage hadn't been met. So I think that's helpful. Yeah, that being one example. Could be
so
others.
our plan is not to bring you anything that is incomplete or half-baked.
Much
And-
appreciated.
And if it is,
That's great.
then you just need to tell us.
It'll save a
well,
lot
you
of
haven't
people's
done that
time.
recently, but
Right.
and the chronic complaint was that people didn't feel like they knew what it was they were to have done before. I think it's been addressed clearly.
So, like I said, this will be handed out in advance and say if you want to bring a plat before the Planning Commission, be prepared to address these items on your design and in your presentation.
That's excellent.
Yes, sir.
I wonder if you or John couldn't talk about the Heritage Commission meeting tomorrow in St. John's Hospital?
Yes, we can give you just a heads up. There was an article in the newspaper today. If you recall, we had a proposal from the Salina Regional Health Center to do a complete demolition and removal of the former St. John's Hospital, that entire block, and that request was denied by the City Commission. After that request, they transferred ownership of the majority of that parcel to a company called Sunflower Development, which is out of Kansas City, Missouri. The what we call the Mediah Center, or the old nuns' quarters, it's on the northwest corner of that property, was purchased by Blue Beacon, and they wish to rehab that nuns' quarters into residential apartments. And to get parking and sufficient land area to go with that, they went to the Heritage Commission and got approval to demolish a non-historical wing along Ash Street, and that has been removed. Now, the developers are working with the State Historic Preservation Office, and they are trying to secure eligibility for historic tax credits. And many of our projects that we've had in town have utilized tax credits, such as the conversion of the Roosevelt Lincoln Middle School. The way that works is that the state has a tax credit and the federal government has a tax credit, and when you stack those up, they add up to 45%, and that is, by selling those credits, you can put that money in as equity into the project. So the historic aspects of that building have been covered up by newer additions, and that is why it's not on any National Historic Register, because it's been altered. What they want to do is pull off the modern additions on the front of the 1914 hospital and see how much historic material and original detail is there, and then if it is present, that would likely make the building and project eligible for historic designation and tax credits. So they are going before the Heritage Commission tomorrow to seek approval to demolish those front portions. And so the long-term plan would be to demolish, and the Heritage Commission has that plan, but that is a cobbled together building that's had multiple additions to it in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and they're planning to remove all those modern flat-roofed portions so that only the 1914 and 1951 building remains, and then to rehabilitate that. But to determine if the 1914 facade is still there on the front, they need to remove those front portions. So they're seeking the Heritage Commission approval to do that, and there'll be a special meeting tomorrow at 4 to review that.
And Commissioner Bappa, you are the liaison to the Heritage Commission? The other question that I had, Mr. Andrew, was I saw press or publicity today on streets and sewer going in a new subdivision, was what it said with photographs. Is that?
There has been on the City Commission agenda and off again it's just a request for special assessment financing to do a second phase of the Grand Prairie addition, which is up there off of Cedar Ridge Drive. That's the only one I am familiar
No,
with.
this was actually a photograph of work in progress. But
Work in progress.
And it was referring to Mr. Dunn and Mr.
Okay.
Piercy's development.
If you recall, last year we looked at a replat of the north half of River Trail addition, and you approved that replat reconfiguration. City Commission approved that. They also approved partial special assessment financing for improvements, and that project has been bid and let. So I guess that would be what you see is essentially Saddlebrook and River Trail Road being extended to the north. As was indicated, there's 42 lots in that phase of the development.
And they'll all 42 lots will be accessible in this
Yes,
phase
they'll all.
of
There
construction.
are some cul-de-sacs coming off of that, but the main arteries will be put in a complete loop. But that must have been what was indicated in the paper, was that north phase of River Trail. So we will meet again on the 20th, and we do have an item scheduled for your January 3rd meeting. So we'll meet again after the new year.
Any other matters?
Yeah, I was just going to comment parenthetically. It's interesting to look at the land banking article that Mr. Andrew referred us to. I need to read more thoroughly about the land banking, but it is interesting to me that this was, and I think I'm quoting, in response to the return of Big Red 1 to Fort Riley and the encouragement of military and state officials to build out in preparation for this huge influx of troops, which never quite materialized, along with the 2008 recession.
Right.
I think it's an instructive tale about what credence to give outside officials about the big boom that's going to be coming.
It is
There's a
very
lot of
interesting.
land even in Abilene, I think, too.
There
that's-
is the glut.
Yes.
Abilene, Chapman, Junction City, and
Yeah.
most of the development in Manhattan actually happened. But you had Abilene, Chapman, and Junction City in Manhattan that all acted as if all of the influx would come to their community, and
Right.
Right.
they were all wrong.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any other matters? Well, thank you very much, Commissioners. Thank you, staff.
Okay.
And
I
I
said
guess
we
we'll
will have
adjourn.
part 3 of that study session, but we will focus more on the cottage aspect.
Excellent.
Good.
That's good.
I'm all for that.
Yeah.